So Dennis, I looked at your slides. I think you have a lot to really share with this group. I really, you know, I know we talked about 15 minutes, but I think they really need to hear about your experiences. And I'm really just going to do a couple of minutes of, we've much to learn and here's our recommendation. So I'm
Well,
really looking forward to
I
hearing
need to learn.
comments.
I learned from you on Friday.
Yeah, I saw a lot of when you put the notes of things to put it of things that are takeaways. I really appreciate our conversation. So hopefully we'll be able to continue to if we're able to get this recommendation enacted, then we'll continue to want to compare notes and share strategies.
Yeah, and how are you seeking funding for this? Is it through the state? Is it through the legislature?
I don't, well, we're asking for a legislative um, act, the part that we're talking about, the particular council, we're asking for legislation that would establish it. So there would be some funding that it would have to be allocated for it, but that would come as part of the state budget process, or there would be what they would call a if we put forward a bill, there would have to be an analysis about
Yeah.
how the money would come. And I know in other cases, there have been instances where the state has said, well, yeah, we'll pass the bill, but you need some kind of funding.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And like the foundation or something has come in. So I think the first step is to really make the case for the council, but I'm not sure what the strategy is for funding or if different options have been explored yet.
The reason I ask is because we're funded through the Duals Demo grant, or
Oh,
it's just a grant, the Duals Demo, and we need to get something through the legislature. So in the next couple of years, we've got something there, even if it's not funded. We need to have some sort of mandate that'd be required.
mhm.
Hi, I'm sorry to break in really quick. Pat, would you be open to managing the Q&A or just by watching it and the chat feature
Sure.
as you're talking? And that way, if there's questions that people are asking, if you would be able to help moderate that, that would be amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as I was mentioning to Dennis, I'm planning to keep my comments
Hey, who
brief.
who wants to do the captioning here?
Who wants to do the captioning in this breakout?
Hello?
Hello? Hi, who was asking that?
Anybody respond?
Yeah, this is Ariel with the Sign Sound.
Hide the chat.
Let me ask Maria real quick. Hold on.
Okay, thank you.
Did they give you a person?
Pat, I want to let you know that I may be receiving a call in the middle of this, and it's a computer repair person.
Here.
I've been without my
Very important
laptop.
these days.
I know, I've been without my
It's still
laptop.
looping.
So
Okay, I'm not sure what's going on with that. For now,
let
let's
just pop up for a minute.
Yeah. And when Nancy gets back, I'm not sure who's kicking off or sort of just kicking off the meeting or introing us. But then I think between you and I, we can figure it out.
I'm not worried. I do think there needs to be a greater synergy between folks under and over 65 on these things because I'm very concerned about folks over 65 not getting certain services.
Well, and I think the master plan on aging here in California was certainly an effort to ensure that there was a comprehensive look, not only for all income levels, all kinds of entry level, and I think there's an effort to include. We actually kind of had I wouldn't say opposite effect, but the master plan on aging, one of the concerns was that it also addressed issues of disability, which of course are often synergistic in a way. So
Yeah.
I know there are advocates. I think one thing we really have going for us in California is the advocates that support aging and the advocates that support disability are pretty well aligned and coordinate, so that if the aging folks get into an arena, the disability folks know that they have an entree too, and vice versa. So at least one would hope.
Yeah, we try to do that. But sometimes ARP can get involved, and then it's tougher. I like ARP. That's not it. The person who runs ARP Massachusetts is fantastic, but sometimes it feels like that takes it to a different level.
What, and gets more of a focus on aging as opposed to?
Not aging as much as certain aspects of care.
I got you.
As opposed to, and I think the voice changes. And that's
A lot of
not.
what they're doing here is really focused on support for the caregiver.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And that's at the ARP LTSS report. It's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been very, very like the huge voice, the voice on care for the caregiver.
Mm-hmm.
And Massachusetts has a very bad rating in providing care for caregivers. You know, I always bring up that report at meetings. And so, well, if you look at the AARP report, we're down here in these categories.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a helpful way to benchmark.
It is.
We all get into our own individual states' work, and oftentimes one of the first questions you get from a legislator or a policymaker is, well, how do they do it in other states?
Exactly.
So it's always good to have that data.
Yeah. And that's what I was asking you about, whether you're going to go legislative route or in terms of the council.
Yeah, well, I think the council, the collaborative has served a pretty positive role in terms of providing information on a general level and weighing in where it can on things around the dual demo and things like that. I think establishing the council is an effort to sort of get that mandate you were referring to from the state. So one of the advocacy goals, the one that I'll be referencing in my brief comments, is that we're advocating that there be legislation that sets up this council. And that way it has to happen, and there has to be a report from it. So, we're at the very beginning of a 2-year session, so it's the time to start pushing these ideas out there, and they will evolve. There will be lots of back and forth, but that's the marker we're putting down to start.
Yep.
And Pat?
Yes.
We have our guests that are arriving here.
Okay. And Nancy, who is kicking off the meeting and sort of introducing us?
That bear with me just a moment. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get the meeting started. We'd like to say hello to everyone and thank you for joining us on our session called Creating an Effective Integrated Services and Supports Planning Council. We are very honored to have Pat Bladesdell join us. She's the Vice President for Continuum of Care for California Hospital Association, as well as Dennis Heafy, who is Chair of the Massachusetts One Care Implementation Council. Thank you both for joining us. And Pat, if you can start us off, that would be great.
Okay, and the slides, is somebody going to be sharing the screen with the slides, or would you like me to do that?
If you feel comfortable starting the slides, that would be great. I can share screen with you, or I can have the AV system do that. Would you like
I have the slides, and actually, so let me take a moment and bear with us, folks. Let me open them up, and that might be easiest since we're going to be doing the talking. If you don't mind, I can do that.
I'll have you be made host.
Well, or I can do it from my screen. Thank you to everybody who's listening in while we futz around with this. This is it's all a learning process. Okay, can folks see my screen now?
Yes.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, Nancy, does that work for you?
Sure. If you can go to view and do full screen, there you go. Thank you.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. So, yeah, thank you, Nancy, for getting us to kicking us off here. I'm, as she mentioned, been a long-term member of the collaborative, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about one of the recommendations that the collaborative is making for our advocacy agenda this year, which relates to the establishment of a long-term services and supports advisory council. So what I'd like to do is spend the bulk of our time listening from a gentleman I just had the opportunity to meet late last week, Dennis Heafy, who has done some excellent work in Massachusetts, where I used to work, by the way. So I know a little bit about the state. Dennis, we'd love to hear your experiences. And I think that we have set it up. So we're going to start with the slides here. There we go. There we are. There's the two of us. Dennis Heafy is the co-chair for the Disability Advocates Advancing Our Healthcare Rights. And most critically to our discussions today, Mr. Heafy has been very active in establishing a council there in Massachusetts. And we've been comparing notes and lessons learned, and hope to continue to do so in the future. So to get us started, I'm going to move us on and ask Dennis to take over and start his discussion. And Dennis, just let me know when you want me to advance the slides to support your comments.
Sure. I just see from this slide, it says nothing about us without us, and the concept behind the council is that that the majority of the council is run by and for folks on Medicaid in Massachusetts called Mass Health. Next slide, please. The idea for the council, actually, let me take a step back. When the Affordable Care Act was passed, we organized folks in Massachusetts, disability rights organizations, healthcare organizations, and a host of other groups together to create this coalition to look at what would be our priorities as the state was moving into a managed care system. And we started with a dual eligibles demonstration because that was the first one that was coming online. Next slide, please. There are three innovations. There are other things we were able to get included in the One Care demonstration. That's the dual eligible demonstration in Massachusetts, which is for folks 21 to 64. We already have an existing senior care options program for folks over 64 years of age, and so this was meant to be targeted at folks in younger folks with high levels of social complex medical behavioral health and other complex care needs. Three things we were able to get included were an independent living LTS coordinator, long-term service and support coordinator. And the reason why we requested this role to be included in OneCare and provide people the option of having someone on their care team who would be a conflict-free individual with expertise in long-term service and support was to ensure that the medical model just didn't dominate people, and that if people could identify LTSS that they needed, that there'd be someone in the group in the team that could actually advocate for those things. We're finding actually that the LTS coordinator is working a lot on addressing SDOH, social determinants of health, and the intersection of LTSS and SDOH. The second innovation is the Consumer-Led Implementation Council, which is what I'm really going to be discussing today. And the third is an independent ombudsman. And OneCare includes an independent ombudsman program that integrates IL and recovery principles as fundamental elements of person-centered care. And so the ombudsman program is actually run out of a CBO. It happens to be the CBO I work for, the Disability Policy Consortium, and it's majority of folks who work there are folks with some sort of disability, physical, behavioral health, whatever it may be, and that ombudsman program not only serves folks in the dual eligibles demonstration, but now across the board folks who are in MCOs and ACOs, who are on Medicaid and or Medicaid and Mass Health. Next slide. Okay, so this is I stole this from the Mass Health website so that I couldn't be accused of saying something that wasn't accurate. So the implementation council selected members, consumer stakeholders, and we actually don't select the members. The members are selected by Mass Health, our Medicaid office, although we make recommendations, and it is a very robust conversation that we have, and I think we really work hard on a consensus model with the state, and they work with us on that as well. So next slide. I don't need to read all these things. And so it says here that our role is to monitor health, work on making sure there's compliance with the ADA, track quality of services, and providing support and input to EOHHS, and promote accountability and transparency. We really spend a lot of time looking at quality of services and how can we increase the quality of services and the transparency and accountability pieces, because those are really tough to do in the managed care world, especially when we have systems in place where the decision-making processes are proprietary, and it can be difficult for someone to actually know why and how a decision was made in prior authorization. Next slide. Okay. These are some of the priority areas we're looking at. We're really drilling down on what is the role of the care coordinator. And one of the reasons we're doing that is we've seen an increase in the number of folks a care coordinator is responsible for in their role compared to when OneCare started. So the ratio of care coordinators to members has been increasing over time. And so we just don't understand how, in an enhanced care coordination model, you can have care coordinators with increasing numbers of folks that they're supposed to be working with, particularly when we're talking about folks with some of the highest needs in the state. We're looking at care coordination versus care integration. Versus isn't really the right word to use there. It's more about how do you ensure that care coordination includes care integration, because they're not necessarily the same thing. Care coordination might be something that takes place within the insurer, as opposed to care integration, which ensures that the folks, family members, and other organizations outside of the insurer are included on care teams based on the desire of the member. We also want to make sure that the rebalances of priorities away from medical to LTSS and diversionary services and SDOH services. One of the things that we thought was really exciting about the duals demo is the idea that they want to reduce the overall spend on medical toward and move towards a more LTSS, diversionary service, SDOH. And we think that not only is it important to rebalance the priorities, but make sure those priorities reflect the values of the folks and the needs of the folks enrolled in OneCare. We have made as a priority of the council an equity focus on women, in particular women of color, and women across risk categories. And that's because we want to make sure that the folks, the women especially, whether they've got a mental health diagnosis, substance use diagnosis, may have low medical needs but high SDOH needs, or high medical needs, are all getting equitable care in the system. We haven't quite figured out how that's going to work yet, but we are pushing for it right now. And increased oversight of plans, including data transparency. It can be really challenging to get accurate and appropriate data out of plans. And so we've been able to get some data out of the RTI reports. And the RTI reports have been able to provide us information, for instance, on whether or not the plans are actually reducing ED visits and hospitalizations. And so we don't think that's the same as providing data transparency needed by consumers to make the appropriate choice in which plan they choose, or whether they choose to join OneCare or not. And we're also looking at plan response to COVID-19. The plans seem to do a really good job on doing outreach and providing SDOH, but we want to better understand what they're going to do, and we've been really pressing hard on this, what they're going to do from the prevention strategy. They've got, like, we have not seen any sort of strategy for testing or tracing, any strategy for wide dissemination of PPE, not after someone's been tested positive for COVID, but actually the prevention strategy. And so these are things that we are looking at right now. In addition to making sure that that people's SDOH needs are met, and not just in a cookie cutter way, but ensuring that they're being met in a person-centered way. We want to make sure that care plans include emergency preparedness in them, and that within COVID, that would include the testing, tracing, and other things, whatever's identified with the individual. Because the needs of someone living in an urban setting, needs of someone living in a rural setting are quite different. Next slide. I think this is it. What's on the next slide? Sorry. Okay. And I can talk more about that, but we'll do that after you. And I just want to take a little step back and say that the start of the council really came with a commitment from MassHealth, the leadership at the time, to ensuring consumer voice was real. We just didn't want an advisory council, because it's very easy to create an advisory council that really has no real input or no real voice, but they can just check it off that there is a council there. We wanted a real one, and that's why we call it the implementation council. That we are engaged in the implementation of OneCare and ensuring the quality of the program. At the time, the administration was very supportive. The funding for OneCare for the implementation council actually is paid for by the duals. Demo is part of the budget, and the support we receive is from UMass Massachusetts, and they have a contract with MassHealth to provide support to us, and that support includes helping us with preparing for meetings, taking minutes, coordination of our activities, like so many things, and so it has from the start been a very collaborative process, and so we try to keep it that way. We have at the table that we sit at when we're not at a virtual table. It's the Medicaid MassHealth members or a family member, a couple of representatives from community-based organizations, and MassHealth, representatives from MassHealth, and representatives from the two plans. Now the plans representatives really don't have a voice. However, they're present so they can present their perspective, and they're also present so we can ask them questions. It's not an opportunity like we don't put them on the spot. We can ask tough questions, but the idea is to engage in an active, robust dialogue. Um, let me see. Is there any other? Uh, we can get back to that in a minute. I don't want to hold you up, Pat.
Well, no, thank you, Dennis. And let me say on behalf of the group here, we welcome having you at our virtual table anytime. And yes, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about what the goals of the collaborative are in this arena. And then if anybody has any questions, please, and for Dennis, please put them into the chat box and we'll have time to circle back to those items. But just to kind of talk a little bit about how we feel this relates to our work in California. Let me just kind of reflect a little bit on the work of the collaborative. It's been my pleasure and privilege to be part of the collaborative since its beginning. And I don't need to tell you what the collaborative is and really what it does. But what I do want to stress is how important and unique the collaborative has come to work in the Capitol. It's afforded the opportunity to really work across the various components of the continuum of health and social services. And that really is unique. You know, the advocacy community is a collection of a number of different groups. And from the get-go, the collaborative really sought to work across all of those individual group areas and try and develop common goals and to share perspectives and to collectively, ultimately move policy forward in a way that benefits the older adults and persons with disability in California. So how have we done this? Well, I think in a nutshell, what the collaborative has aimed to do is provide an informed, thoughtful, and constructive voice to the state's work on developing an effective and accessible continuum of care of long-term services and supports. So where does the collaborative use its voice? Well, anywhere and any way that we can. First of all, there's been a lot of, you've heard already today, there's been a lot of communication, ongoing communication that many of you, most of you have participated in at some level in order to inform state legislation and policy whenever we can. The collaborative has ongoing communication with key state legislators and policymakers around issues that we know affect older adults and persons with disabilities. I was very gratified to hear the comments from Assemblymember Wood. I think one thing he said was that you, meaning the collaborative, raise issues that we wouldn't think of otherwise. Well, that's really an important component and a thing that the collaborative can really bring to the table. Also, we heard from Assemblymember Nazarian about his giving credit to the collaborative and the respective member organizations for voicing concerns about the the budget cuts that were initially proposed, and that it was the collective work, both the individual members of the collaborative as well as the collaborative as an entity, kind of getting behind that message that the changes that we had to make in the context of the budget should not happen at the expense of any progress we have made in the work of the long-term services and supports community. Another big area that the collaborative has been advocating for is within the context of the Master Plan on Aging. No fewer than 17 members of the governor's stakeholder advisory group on the Master Plan on Aging were from the collaborative or from organizations that participate in the collaborative. So there was a lot of shared voice and shared information. And they have, when you see the recommendations of the Master Plan on Aging, I'm sure you will see that influence come through loud and clear. One thing that happened early on, of course, was to ensure that the Master Plan on Aging was also incorporated the input and advocacy on part of the, excuse me, I'm doing a little bit of maintenance here. I apologize. That they also made sure that the master plan on aging reflected the perspectives of the disability community and the shared interests that the communities of older adults and persons with disability have. So communication with state legislatures, input on legislation, participation in the master plan on aging. But we also talk, so we try and talk to the state legislators and the other key stakeholders, but we also talk to each other. So as a member of the collaborative and as one who represents primarily the medical community, I can't tell you how much my work on behalf of and communication within the hospital community has been informed by what I have learned from my colleagues at the California Collaborative. So that's not always so obvious to the external folks. It's not a bill in the legislature. It's not the MPA. But the collaborative has exerted an incredible influence on the work of all of the members just by virtue of ensuring that the various perspectives are represented in our ongoing discussions. Okay, I'm trying to, there we go. So this brings us to our final, my final slide before we get to some questions and discussion. And that is one of the three major advocacy goals that the collaborative has identified. We are in the spirit of continuing the very constructive work of the Master Plan on Aging. We are asking for legislation that would create a California Integrated Services and Supports Planning Council to include a diverse set of stakeholders to advise and support implementation of the California Master Plan on Aging. And I think I heard Dennis talk about how that word implementation is so key. It's not just about talking about how they're going to do it. It's actually an active participant in the implementation. So as we move forward, I think we believe that the importance of the Master Plan on Aging and the implementation of the Master Plan on Aging requires continued ongoing collaboration between consumers, advocates, providers, and others. And that's why we're making this very specific recommendation for legislation that would support that process. So I think I've learned a lot from Dennis's comments today and the conversation we had on Friday. And I think there's many lessons to be learned from the trailblazers in Massachusetts on this. And I'm looking forward to providing some support for the overall advocacy goals of the collaborative. So at that point, I think that concludes our formal comments, but we do have some time for questions.
I just wanted to make a statement, Pat, about, I didn't mention that probably one of our strongest allies is CMS, the duals office. Tim Engelhardt, Jennifer Barron, and other people at CMS have been very much supportive of the council and the concept of, an implementation council that's actually actively engaged. And we're not the only council of its kind in the country rather. Rhode Island now has one. I think they started theirs a year or two after we did. And the model is somewhat different, but we actually work together. I participate on their calls. They join our calls, the leadership does. And then we also, the One Care Council, with these bi-monthly meetings, so every 2 weeks. I always forget what bi-monthly means. So it's every 2 weeks there's a meeting, and that's primarily just of consumers on the council, and consumers from Rhode Island's council also join us. And so we get a larger representation of and that's primarily older folks over 65. And so we try to get a broader representation of what the issues and concerns are. So I just wanted to make sure that we pointed out. And I also want to just give a shout out and thank Justice in Aging, because they are an incredible ally in the work that we do, and we're always reaching out to them for help, as well as Community Catalyst and other organizations. So I want to make sure I didn't leave those folks out, because really without the support of CMS, the active support of CMS, as well as the active support of Mass Health, we don't think we'd be able to accomplish anything. So I want to just make sure that was part of the conversation.
thank you, Dennis. I think that speaks to the strong underlying message here, which is it's all about collaboration and welcoming people to the virtual table, including the government agencies like CMS and the very strong advocacy organizations like Justice and Aging. I want to remind folks in the group that if they want to ask a question of me or Dennis, to please enter it into the chat room. In the meantime, I had a couple of thoughts based on what I heard from Dennis early on. I was really taken with your discussion around integration. I think you had a slide that said care coordination versus care integration. First of all, I would echo that in California, we have found that care coordination is a big part of the concerns and problems we have had to date with the implementation of the CCI. What constitutes care coordination? Is it having a plan and checking a box, or is it meaningful person-centered discussion and access to services? So I was very appreciative of your distinction between care coordination. First, your identification of care coordination as a high priority and a key issue here, and also your distinction between what constitutes care coordination and care integration. Particularly important in the context of looking at the integration of medical care services with long-term services and supports and community-based services, which is the area that I live in the most.
I would also just, I'm sorry, Patty, I want to add to that, is that what's also really important is breaking down the silo between LTSS as something for folks with ADL or IDL needs as like a primary need in their, whatever their diagnosis is, or makes them eligible for Medicaid or Mass Health in Mass Health and Medicare. We also want to make sure that there's equitable access to LTSS for folks who have behavioral health diagnoses, whether it's substance use disorder or mental health diagnosis. And with that, we'd like making sure that folks who have, let's say, depression or some other mental health diagnosis have access to queuing of PCA, like queuing from personal care attendant services. Because like myself, I use personal care attendants to carry out activities of daily living, but so does a person who may have depression also need someone to support their ability to carry out their functions through queuing them through the day. And so we're trying to make sure that there really is equitable access to LTSS across the populations. And I want to just make sure that,
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought up the need to integrate physical health and mental health issues and behavioral health. That's particularly challenging here in California, given the way our reimbursement system is set up. Being able to not only develop parity for access to mental health services, but also integrate those services so that we're supporting all of our citizens. I have a question for you, Dennis. You mentioned when we talked previously, you talked a little bit about the role of data and meaningful data. Could you tell a little bit about what your thoughts are about how the council can access data, or what kind of data might be most helpful?
The question is a tough one to answer. If you'd asked me the question 6 years ago, I would have had a very simple answer. It would have been something to the effect of, well, we want to be able to track the per person dollar expenditure on LTSS over time, and seeing that increase over time. The same with diversionary services. And so we'd be able to track not only the total dollar expenditure, but the dollar expenditure specifically on the services people require themselves. I think also we're looking at numbers around oh geez, it's been so long. Like, for instance, what percentage of overall spend is being put on in LTSS? How many dollars being put back into the system? And then just the other data we've been asking, and this is no one gets to say, I don't think, but data on race and ethnicity. making sure that folks from ethnic minority populations are getting equitable access to services. Data on not just utilization data, but data on the percentage of folks who actually uh, get the services they require to achieve their care goals. Uh, Data on the complaints and appeals that are made internally within the plans, as well as those appeals that go to the state or to Medicare. And so getting some of that data is really important, because we do believe that by better understanding appeals data and what percentage of appeals are actually upheld versus what percentage of appeals are overturned, will give us a sense of how well plans are supporting people. So if a plan has a very high percentage of folks, a high percentage of appeals that are overturned, I mean, are in the favor of the member, then that says there's something going on with the plan. And so we would like to see more. There's a lot of other data, but those are just some things that just pop into my mind right now. And the reason why it's hard for me to even think about data is because it's been such a struggle to actually access data that we're trying other ways of implementing or steering change, and that is by focusing on what tool do you use in creating the care plan, what is the training of the care coordinator, and as opposed to just getting scenarios and examples of what they do, but like really getting down to the level of how can we ensure that everyone is getting establishing real care goals that reflect their priorities. And I think there's one of the pieces is how do we make sure that that in one care, because of the nature of the population, that's got such folks have such high needs, that we don't want folks to be on folks who are non-compliant, and the idea of non-compliance. We think that if the care coordinator should be built on a caring, trusting relationship between the member and the coordinator, that the number of folks who are not engaged in their care planning and goal setting and implementation will decrease over time. And so that's what we're looking for that. Is that helpful?
Yeah, absolutely. In Massachusetts, are all Medicaid beneficiaries enrolled in what, OneCare?
No,
So you have-
it's Medicaid and Medicaid and Medicare. We do have accountable care organizations. We have district money from the feds, and so folks who are on straight Medicaid are enrolled in the ACO system, or we also have a fee-for-service plan as well. What's challenging, and this goes back to what you're doing right now with the California Integrated Service and Planning Council, is that depending on who the payer is and how many payers there are, people have access to different levels of LTSS. And so there's built-in inequitable system there. So if someone's got both Medicaid and Medicare and they're enrolled in OneCare, their chance of getting more services are higher than someone who's straight Mass Health. And so how do you prevent that?
Yes, I think you've really hit on something that's been a pain point for us. We're a very large state. There are multiple Medi-Cal,
Yep.
which is our Medicaid managed care plans. There are multiple Medicare plans, some of which include duals and some of which do not. And there are a number of entities, so it can get quite confusing. And I encounter it largely when there are case managers in the hospital setting trying to access whoever they need to help this person transition to another setting. But I can't imagine how complex it is for the beneficiary, in particular when it does seem that there's so many different players. So I think that's something that we'll want to continue to talk about. You mentioned during your conversation.
You just said care transitions, and that's something we do look at, and we're hoping the new contract language will be stronger to ensure that there is actually continuity of care in the care transitions. And so it's not worth asking for data now about care transitions if we actually don't even know how it functions on the ground. And in some places, again, it may depend on the care coordinator. where if there's a really good care coordinator, that care transition is seamless, and the person goes home and they're seen by their personal care attendant services are set up, or there's like the equipment they need set up, or the meals are set up. With other ones, it may not be the case. And then maybe folks who are sent to a rehab, they would prefer to go home, and the services aren't set up, and so it makes it a challenge for them to go home. And so we really want to better understand and hope that the and provide guidance or to state and say that we definitely want to see smoother care transitions both to and from the hospital, and that the care plan be upgraded to indicate to include whatever was changed while the person was in the hospital.
You also referenced prior authorization. What kinds of things are you seeing in the context of the impact of prior authorization procedures, and what are the areas that kind of cause some concern that you think we might need to be tuned into?
One of our hopes when OneCare started, and we look at it as a demonstration, was that the seat of decision making would be within the care team, and that the prior auth team, while necessary, would not be able to override decisions by the care team and the care coordinator if they're in keeping with the care goals and the needs of the person. What we're seeing is an increased reliance and tightening up and utilization of population based prior authorization AI, and that's not appropriate for these populations. One of the reasons why OneCare was, again, these are highly complex populations, myself included, and you need really person-centered, highly tailored care plans and care goals, and that's not the way prior authorization works. And I'll give you an example from a plan that once in the past the decision for how many hours personal care attendant hours a person would receive was decided within the care team by the care coordinator. And now they've got a separate prior auth team that has not met the person, has no real relationship with the person, and they're the ones that are making that decision now, which is really contrary to what OneCare is supposed to be about.
Well, thank you, Dennis. I don't see any other questions in our chat box. Any more words of wisdom? And I know how to find you, so I'm going to be calling you again on some of these questions.
I think what I would say is we've made many mistakes, and we're still learning, and that the journey is not a straight line, and it's growing. All the parties are always growing in terms of better understanding what to ask, what's really what's actually possible, and what people's real needs are. And so, if I had any advice to give you guys, it's when you're doing this legislative call, is to make sure that what you put forward to the legislature in the master plan on aging really reflects the on-the-ground voice of people, because when it moves up to a higher level, the voice can often be lost, and then it becomes more of a wonky conversation. And I know that because I've done it. And so I think that's really key, is stay close to the ground and what people identify as their priorities.
Well said. Keep the voice going. So thank you so much, Dennis, for your time today. And on behalf of the collaborative, I appreciate your participation. Nancy, I'm gonna turn it back to you so we can wrap up and move on to whatever's next on this busy day.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Pat and Dennis. We really appreciate you being here. We thank you for being such wonderful speakers. We're honored to have you with us and appreciate the discussion around the idea of launching a planning council. There are some great takeaways for California to consider as we explore this idea in the future. With that, we're going to go ahead and leave. And if everyone wants to check out the agenda tab, and you can see what our second set of breakout sessions are, that will start at 12:15. We will see you there. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Pat. Thanks, Nancy.
Thank you, Dennis.
Bye, everybody. Bye, Marley.
How do we end session